Hi, this is Brian Choi, CEO of the Food Institute, and welcome to the Food Institute podcast. This week, we will be speaking with Erica Kuhlmann, Market Executive and Managing Director of BMO Harris Bank's Food, Consumer, and Agribusiness Group. Erica will be sharing the key themes from last month's 16th annual Farm to Market conference. But before we get started, I'd like to ask all of our listeners today to share this episode within your networks. It's a huge help to us, and I wanted to thank everyone who's done so before. If you are new to the podcast, please follow, like, and share as it extends our reach, and we really appreciate it when you do so. Today's episode is brought to you by BMO Harris Bank. Whether you're a producer, processor, retailer, or distributor, every company throughout the food continuum needs a financial partner that understands the factors that can impact their business. To learn more about how BMO can help, please visit www.bmoharris.com/food. With that said, I'll introduce Erica. How are you today?
I'm great. How are you doing, Brian? And really pleased to be part of the podcast. So thank you.
So, to kick things off, Erica, please share with our audience a little more about your background and also about the Farm to Market conference.
Sure. So as you said, I had the Food, Consumer, and Agribusiness Group at BMO Harris. BMO Harris has had a specialization in food and agribusiness for well over 50 years. And our practice is national, and we cover companies that literally go from farm to market. So we have a large production ag business, as well as everything in between, and then out to the consumer. It's been an integral part of BMO's commitment to the sector, as well as the annual Farm to Market conference. And I think for BMO, that is really the signature event in our sector and really represents the commitment that BMO has to food and agribusiness. So, as you said, it was our 16th annual Farm to Market conference. It covers private and company presentations across the global food and agricultural sector. Again, from literally from the farm to the market. And like last year, we were virtual this year and had the opportunity to host over 90 public and private companies, presenting to more than 500 equity and debt investors. So, in total, for our virtual conference, there were close to 1,000 attendees, which is really great. I would just add that the conference is unique in that it provides participants with a full view into trends in inputs, packaged food, retailing, and restaurants. So really covers a lot of ground. It's an incredible offering, and I think lots of very valuable insights into the sector for our clients.
That's great, Erica. And that's a perfect segue as that sets up the key theme for today's podcast. So let's go through some of the key themes that came out of the conference. And so, maybe you can start with, some of your insights on the key labor theme that came out from the conference.
Sure. And certainly we heard a lot of this, both from a public company as well as from a private company standpoint. I mean, labor is just the key factor for companies in food and agribusiness, and is a really a serious challenge. So what we see companies doing, they are using compensation, sign-on bonuses, retention bonuses to attract and retain talent. They're using different recruiting tools and are really focused on how do we make our employees, our teammates, feel really valued as
Mhm.
part of the overall, you know, how the business operates. And it's really interesting. Certainly, we've heard from some in the distribution business, which is certainly labor intensive. They noted that their experience has been that they'll see folks who start working determine that they don't particularly like the work, and they will just simply leave. And just this has not ever been seen before. So that's an unusual phenomenon. Um, what we also see is that manufacturers are really focused on and are investing in automation to eliminate positions wherever possible. Uh, I think the comment that we often hear is just that a machine shows up every day for 24 hours. So it's really a challenge, and I think it's here to stay.
Yeah, it's really interesting the comments that you made about the labor side because typically you would expect that type of behavior to come from employees in the tech sector, like the Facebooks of the world, right? Retaining talent, compensation, bonuses. Based on your conversations with some of the leaders of these food businesses, what's the expectation of how long these labor issues will last, specifically as it relates to these higher wages and retaining talent? Is it a short term phenomenon or a long term one?
I really think the companies that we visit with are looking at labor as a continuing kind of long term challenge. And so that's why, they are looking at, can I invest, millions of dollars into equipment or a new line to reduce the number of people that I have in my facility. And they're willing to do that because it is not just a short term phenomenon. So I think we're going to continue to see this, and the investment in equipment, as I said, to eliminate positions. But it ultimately means that there certainly is a higher cost structure that uh, you'll have, and it will certainly impact margins uh, going forward.
Got it. I imagine that most of this automation and AI will be in the manufacturing sector, or do you see it all across the supply chain?
I think that we'll see it primarily in manufacturing, but I do believe you'll see it across the whole chain. I think distribution is more challenging to automate just from the cost standpoint, and just the just what you need with distribution. A lot of drivers, investment in trucks and whatnot. That certainly that's not, well. I shouldn't say that's not going to change, but uh, I think in the near term we won't see self-driving distribution.
Right, right. You also had a key theme you wanted to share about the consumer. So please share what came out of that conference from as it relates to the consumer.
So, and I think that this started before the pandemic, where companies really are responding and focused on the consumer and what does the consumer want. And I think that has just, we're moving back to that theme from the focus on the consumer. And, today's consumer is really making that connection, I think, between health and nutritional benefits and the environment to the food that they are purchasing. One of the comments coming out of the conference was to think of food as food with a purpose, and that is what the consumer is looking for today. Think before, you really had the branded food companies of telling consumers this is what we think you want, and now it's really, I believe, the consumer in the driver's seat saying this is what we want. And so food companies, food manufacturers respond to us.
Got it. Yeah, what was interesting when I looked at the list of the companies that were presenting, a couple of them, namely Bright Farms, App Harvest, Gotham Greens, Arrow Farms, just 5 years ago, these companies were on nobody's radar. And it seems like in the past year or so, they've come to the forefront. So, my question to you is, how much of the interest in these types of companies do you attribute to consumers' interest in health and wellness versus their interest in sustainability and even food reliability?
I think they're all related. I think, certainly consumers are more focused on where does my food come from. I want to know where this is grown, where this is produced. How did it get here? And so I think that's why you have this real focus on local. And when you look at some of the companies that were presenting, Gotham Greens or Bright Farms, they're really focused on being local and getting into distribution into the retail with a very fresh product. And what's interesting when you are local, then you really have a longer shelf life. I think at retail, because you're not distributing over a long, uh, over a real expansive geography. So I think that consumers are interested in certainly the nutritional benefits. I think that they are also interested equally in sustainability. So, how does this how does this lettuce, how does this tomato, how does this produce, is it conserving water? I mean, water, energy. So I think sustainability is important to the consumer, and as well understanding where my food is coming from. They want to know.
Right. What we're seeing here at the Food Institute is a lot of that demand is coming from the younger generation, the millennials and the Gen Z. It'll be interesting as future farm to market conferences, like how the role of technology and sustainability, for example, companies like Appeal Sciences that's developed a layer that covers fruit and vegetables that can extend the shelf life 2 weeks, right? And just think about the billions of dollars that retailers and consumers can save. So it'd be really interesting to see how this evolves over the next couple of years. But definitely, health and wellness, as we're seeing, is a major mega trend going forward, and our expectation is that that will continue at least for the next 5 to 10 years. So. A third factor and key theme that you mentioned was about inflation. So, what were some of the key thoughts surrounding inflation that came from the conference?
So I think this is something that all companies are trying to understand and get a view on. We're certainly seeing higher costs across the board. So labor, freight, packaging, our commodities, protein. You kind of you name it, and costs are higher. So the question is this, which we're all struggling with, is this transitory or is this something that's more sustained? And I really think that, and this is my personal opinion, that these higher costs, certainly as it relates to labor, probably as it relates to transportation, um, are 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 just that's just going to be kind of business, moving forward. So
Mhm.
I think that component of it is more inflationary and more sustained. We certainly see this too in commodities, and whether that's the grains or protein, and there's a lot of dynamics going on um, between kind of those commodities, uh, the renewable diesel movement and mandate. And I think we're going to see, and we certainly are seeing more discussions about the whole dynamic of food versus fuel that
Mhm.
we saw, in the early 2000s as ethanol really kind of took off. So I believe that certainly higher prices. and higher costs are just going to be the way we do business. I think the other costs that we are just trying to get our heads around now too is the investment in the supply chain, and so
Hmm.
it's related. What did we learn about the supply chain from COVID? Just in time doesn't really work when you have such a shock like COVID. And I think companies are really focused on building redundancy, building flexibility into the supply chain. So that just by definition means would suggest that there's a greater cost to building that kind of resilience into
Right.
into the supply chain and investment in working capital. So I think we will have these higher costs, and how we're able to pass them on or innovate, to reduce those will be our challenge, kind of looking forward.
Yeah, I think it's when you look at the past 5 to 10 years and inflation rate just being around that 2%, I think people have kind of gotten accustomed. This is the norm. But when you
Hmm.
look at the 80s, inflation was north of 10%. And so it'll be very interesting to see, like you said, Erica, as the cost of these raw materials rise, as their supply chain disruptions, you have to pay more for transportation, how much of it will be able to be passed on to the consumer. That's the first thing. And the second issue is, will consumers be able to afford these higher prices, right?
Right,
So it's a huge issues, but definitely one that we'll be watching very closely over the next 12 months.
right.
And I guess another key theme that you mentioned was the impact of technology and e-commerce. So please share some of your thoughts that came from the conference related to those two things.
Sure. Technology, e-commerce, across the board. Again, we see, food and agribusiness companies investing in this. Certainly, we all saw it at the retail level. And the growth rates of retailers and manufacturers in product purchase through e-commerce just skyrocketed during the pandemic. Kroger, in their presentation, noted that the average digital online shopping cart is 3 times the historical average of the in-store cart. So when you
Wow.
have those type of dynamics, you know that retailers, manufacturers are going to invest and understand, what e-commerce and what technology means for them. I think the other component is that retailers are using this data to mine kind of shoppers, um, how consumers are shopping, and using these analytics really to target consumers and then personalize the offering that they have. Most retailers would say, these type of analytics and having that available to them is just a key competitive advantage to really focusing their offering.
Got it. It'll definitely be fascinating data, and being able to collect, the data to understand the psychographics of consumer is definitely one that we're seeing as well. The last theme that I think I'd like to touch upon is this whole agenda around ESG, and I'd like for you to kind of share your high level thoughts, and almost tease our audience here, because we will be doing another podcast later this year, specifically focused on ESG. But what were some of the your main key takeaways as it relates to ESG from this past conference?
So I, the overarching takeaway is every company, whether you're in inputs, so as an ag input supplier or manufacturer, or you are a farmer, or you are a packaged food company or a retailer, just every company is committed to and has set programs standards on ESG. So what's interesting about this is it just didn't come out of nowhere. I mean they've been focused on this for several years, and I think that that's driven by consumers. As we talked about, kind of having food with a purpose, but more importantly, it's investors who are demanding a strategy around ESG, focusing on companies that have a strong commitment to that and investing them, and certainly it's all the way at the board level, for all the companies that presented. Uh, there was a panel where there were several ESG, or the executive in charge of ESG at these various companies, and they all report to a board level position, or they report to the CEO. And so I think we'll continue to hear more about this, but certainly on the ag and food side, there's really an opportunity to achieve these goals, just by nature of the industry.
Right. Well, so this is definitely an area that the food industry has a lot to catching up to do compared to some of the other industries, as you noted, Erica. So I look forward to our podcast later in the fall and to delve deeper into what ESG means for food companies. So that about wraps it up for this edition of the Food Institute podcast. I'd like to thank Erica for spending time with us today, and also BMO Harris Bank for sponsoring this episode. Remember, if you're new to the Food Institute podcast, please follow, like, and share. If you'd like to learn more about BMO Harris Bank, please take a look at the links in our description. Until next time, this is Brian Choi, signing off.